Fund, and we really appreciate you being here today. What we'd like to do is go ahead and start off by opening up in prayer and with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'm going to invite Debbie Hoss, who is the Election Integrity Fund president, up here, along with Ken, who is a World War II veteran and attorney who's here today. Vietnam. I thought they said World War II. You don't. I heard somebody say that you look young for that. If I can have them up here, we're going to start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Debbie?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And thank you, Debbie, for all the work that you've done for Election Integrity Fund as our president. Bob Cushman, can you come up here and open us in prayer, do you mind? Bob is somebody that we're going to hear from in just a little while. He was a poll challenger and a fighter in Cobo Hall in Detroit on the last election day. And I think he's got some important insight towards the end of the program. So I'm going to ask Bob to open us in prayer, if you can.
Thank you, Tim. Please stand.
And or bow your heads.
Dear Father in heaven, we are so grateful for all the many blessings you've bestowed upon us individually and collectively, and given us this great nation. We know that you have guided our founding fathers to give us the best form of governance that's ever been existing on this planet. Please help us going forward. Please guide our actions and make sure that everything that we do helps to glorify you. And thank you for the food we're receiving today. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Bob. There's a few people I'd like to thank really quickly and recognize. Glenn Sitek is here today. Just raise your hand if you could. Glenn is one of our hardest workers. He's one of our warriors on election day. We're thankful for Glenn helping us walk through this. Sharon Allen is in the back today. Sharon is, again, one of our hardest workers, somebody that helped us get through the plan the training today. Arlene and Jerry Allen. Where's Jerry at? Jerry is one of our leaders, one of the ones that helped start the group and has instituted what we've been doing going forward. Paula Rowland contributed and made sure that we had lunch today. She donated money for the lunch today. We are taking donations if you want to, that will go back towards Election Integrity Fund, that will continue to train poll challengers leading up to November 3rd. But please thank her for... No, I know. But please thank her for providing food for us today, if you don't mind. Brenda Savage is the one that helped plan this today. She was the one that helped. Because of certain things going on in Michigan right now, it's hard to get a location to hold a training like this, and she went from training place to place.
This is our third.
This is our third place. And then also, Brenda's going to be going around with these note cards. At the end, we're going to do a Q&A, and what we'd like you to do is if you have questions, please write those down on the card, and we will ask them. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I'll collect them.
And we'll collect them up and we'll ask them. My name is Tim Griffin. I work for the Thomas More Society out of Chicago, and I think that everybody in this room understands that election fraud is something that we want to make sure that we're stopping, that we're making sure that it doesn't happen. That paramount to our elections is making sure that people are being honest, making sure that every single person that's a registered voter only gets one vote. And we want to encourage people to vote. We want to make sure that everybody that wants to vote gets the opportunity to vote. That's the key. But one person gets one vote. And so that's what we're here to do today. I know that you understand that in the last 50 years, we're facing one of the most consequential elections. And the good thing about this group is it's a nonprofit. We don't take a partisan side. Whoever gets the most votes in Michigan should win the state of Michigan. And that's what we want to happen. And we're not taking sides in the presidential campaign or in any of the other campaigns. We just want to make sure that it's a fair election. And I think that's the most important thing. But you also understand that in an electoral college process that when we look at the entire country, all 50 states, there's only about 3 to 5 swing states. And those 3 to 5 swing states are going to decide who wins these different elections throughout the country. And it's going to decide who wins the House, who wins the Senate, and obviously who wins the White House. And for that reason, there are all kinds of actors here at play in Michigan. And we want to make sure that we are a positive influence on the elections, because Michigan is ground zero, and I think that you guys know that. And I would also like to point out that it's not just Michigan that's ground zero, it's Southeast Michigan, because it's so vote rich in this area. There's all kinds of great people down here trying to do the right thing, but we also have reason to believe that there's people that don't have the greatest intentions and that they may want to do the wrong thing. And our only purpose is to be a good influence, a positive influence, to make sure that that doesn't happen on Election Day. So with that being said, I want to introduce Tina Barton. Tina, can you come up here? Now, please welcome Tina. Now, Tina agreed to be here. How long have you been working in the clerk's office, Tina?
So I've been an election administrator for 15 years now. I've actually worked in public service for 30 years, but the last 15 have been spent as an election official.
And I think I pulled you off the campaign trail today to come in here, right?
This is my third stop today, and I have 2 more to go to after this, so I might have to pop out a little early, but yes.
All right, you came from one and you're going to one after this.
That's
and
correct.
You're running in what jurisdiction?
So I'm running for Oakland County Clerk, Register of Deeds. So right here in this county, I'm running to be your next Oakland County Clerk.
Okay. Thank you for taking the time out to be here today. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start walking through the process.
Okay.
And what we'd like to do is what the Election Integrity Fund wants to do. We realize that there's different things that are going to be happening on Election Day, right? There's going to be people voting in person. There's going to be people voting in person, but almost all the ballots in Michigan are going to come through the mail-in voting system. And that's called the AV counting boards, right, where those votes are counted.
Right, and just to give you just a little example of how elevated the absentee ballots are. So this week I had to get absentee ballots out in the city of Rochester Hills. I left work at 5 minutes after midnight on Tuesday night, was back at work by 8 o'clock the next morning, and we were busy getting ballots out. So in the city of Rochester Hills, on Thursday alone, over 23,000 absentee ballots went into the mail. I have 55,000 registered voters. On Monday, my team will be putting another 4,000 absentee ballots in the mail. So by Monday, half of the voters in the city of Rochester Hills will have already been sent an absentee ballot. That's how high the numbers are. So I want you to pay attention that a lot of people are pushing and looking at November 3rd as Election Day. Election Day was last Thursday when the bulk of those ballots dropped in the mail across our entire state. And there's a huge push across the country and the state for people to get their ballots back as quickly as possible, right? So work has to be done in an expedited manner. And you might look at this and say we have 38, 39 days now till the election. We've got time. You don't have time. It is right now. This is election season.
Now, Tina, when somebody fills out their ballot at home, right, their mail-in ballot, and they put it in the mail, what happens next?
So once somebody completes their absentee ballot, one thing I want to make sure, if you are voting absentee, on the back of your envelope, Michigan has changed their envelopes this year. So the ballot that will be coming to you is in a blue and white envelope. The envelope that gets returned to the clerk is a green and white envelope. You need to make sure that when you seal that ballot to come back, that you are signing that envelope on the back, because that is something that we're looking for is a signature. You can either take it to your local clerk's office, drop it off, you can put it in a drop box, or you can put it in the mail. That's going to come back to us at that point. We're going to get those ballots, and the first thing we do before we even receive on that in the qualified voter file is we will scan your envelope. There's a barcode on there above your name. We will scan that barcode. That's going to bring up your voter record and lock your record in place. We are then going to take a look at the signature on the envelope, check the signature on the envelope, and compare it to the signature on the qualified voter file. If they do not match, the process stops right there in processing the ballot. At that point, we are bound to make efforts to contact the voter by letter, by mail, by email, by phone, to let them know that there is a signature discrepancy or they just forgot to sign it. So we do not even receive on that ballot until then. If the ballot has a correct signature on it, we are going to then receive on that into the qualified voter file system for that precinct. That ballot is going to get filed by precinct back in our secured fire-safe vault by precinct number. My staff, every single day, we print off a report of what ballots came in, and then we go back there, we count every single ballot, and we balance every single day. Nobody leaves my office until we're 100% in balance.
Now, Tina, and I also want to say we're recording right now, just so that you know this is being recorded, and they said that we do pick up background noise if that happens. So we kind of view this in different steps, and this is kind of where we think the poll challengers will come in at. We kind of thought of the first step is when people mail in their ballots, and those ballots get received by the clerk's office. And I think that's what you're talking about, right? Is before we get to the context of what poll challengers are and they do, this is the process that your office will go through, right?
Right.
And that's the signature comparison.
Right.
Now, do poll challengers have a role with the signature comparison? Because I know we've heard a lot about signature comparisons.
So the signature comparison is actually done by my staff, because if the signature doesn't match, we're not even receiving on the ballot. So the ballot is not going to be counted into the system as having been received if it's not a valid ballot. So we're only receiving on valid ballots and checking those signatures. And so we have to have a protocol and process in place, so we don't just have one employee who is looking at that saying, oh, that signature doesn't match, we need to set that aside. If we have a signature that doesn't match, you have to call another employee over, and you're gonna go pull their actual voter registration and look at their voter ID card. And look at that. And if it's still not matching, they're going to bring it to me, and they're going to bring it to the deputy clerk, and we're going to make a final decision on whether we think that signature matches or not. So it's going to hit at least 2 to 3 sets of eyes in the office when we're making that determination. So I can tell you in the last election that we always track these, so we keep a problem log. And so we typically have up until Election Day, they have until 8 p.m. on Election Day to cure that type of a situation where they can come in and sign a new card in front of us. Sometimes it's a legitimate issue. Maybe they had a stroke. Maybe they've developed Parkinson's since the last presidential election cycle. Sometimes it's a parent who thought that when their kid went away to college and forgot to sign their ballot, they could sign it for them. Some people think that if they have power of attorney that they can sign someone's ballot, and you can't do that either. So there are a lot of different situations that can happen, and that's why we put that through multiple sets of eyes to make sure we're making a correct determination.
So what we're going to ask you to do is write down questions, and we'll submit them at the end, and we're going to have a couple people up here to answer questions. I think that'll be the best way to get through this. So from a context perspective, these are the things that are all happening leading up to Election Day, correct? So by the time we get to the board with the AV Counting Board room, the signatures should have already been compared.
Right. Signatures should already have been compared at that point. It should never have been received on and counted as a ballot to be counted if the signature doesn't match. The other thing that can happen between this step and that step are a couple of things. We get a report every day of anybody who's deceased and anybody who has moved. So if a ballot has already been issued to John Smith, and we issued him that ballot on September 24th, but the state receives notification on October 1st that John Smith passed away, we will get a report, and we have to go pull that absentee ballot. That ballot cannot be counted if that person passes away prior to Election Day. So we're going to go pull that absentee ballot, and it gets rejected in our system, saying that it cannot be counted due to the voter being deceased. So we also get notification, too, if somebody applied for an absentee ballot and we've issued them that ballot, and in the meantime, they've moved. And if they've moved and re-registered at a new location, we go pull that ballot because their ballot cannot count there if they've already re-registered in a new location.
Okay, so that's kind of some background information about what happens prior to Election Day. Can you tell us a little bit about, let's move forward to the PowerPoint slides that talk about what a poll challenger is, and then maybe some of the other people that we will see inside these absentee voter counting rooms, and kind of explain some of those roles for us.
Yeah, so in our absentee counting board room, for instance, I have about 80 inspectors that work in there because, like I said, we're probably going to end up with about 30,000 absentee ballots at a minimum in the city of Rochester Hills that we will be counting. So some of the faces that you could see in the absentee counting board room are probably also going to be determined by the proximity of the absentee counting board room to your clerk's office. So for instance, some clerks have had to move their absentee counting board rooms off-site from the facilities where they would typically process their absentee ballots because the volume has gotten so great with absentee ballots that a lot of them logistically cannot contain it within their city halls or their town halls. So some of them have moved them to off-site locations. In the city of Rochester Hills, our mayor has closed City Hall to the public on election day for any business that's not election related. So what that's allowed me to do is our entire lower level of City Hall has become my absentee county board room. And so that means it's actually attached to the clerk's office. So the clerk's office all the way through the lower level. So what the people that you could see in there is, obviously you could see me. I'm the city clerk. You might see me in there walking through, just checking to make sure everything's going okay. The deputy clerk, you're going to see the deputy clerk. She's the one making sure that the correct amount of ballots with the AV list are going to come into the absentee county board room. You're going to see captains for each table or for each district or for each precinct, depending on how your clerk does that. In the city of Rochester Hills, we have districts, and those captains for the districts will then be over their group for their particular precincts that they're assigned. So for instance, out of our 4 districts, 8 or 9 precincts. So then you're also going to see, besides those captains, you're going to also see inspectors. And they're the individuals who are going to be processing the ballots throughout the day. And knowing that each of those groups should have equal balance of Republicans and Democrats. So for instance, in an absentee county board room where they are running ballots through a machine, or in and for us, we use 4 high-speed tabulators, there should be a Republican and a Democrat sitting there running those through the machine together. You must have the checks and balances.
So, Tina, the way that we've kind of looked at it is there's the people that are actually there as the poll workers, the people that work in there that are actually doing the process, and then we view that as separate from the clerk's office, which is kind of one step removed from that. And then we've also identified a third group, which is kind of what the Election Integrity Fund is, the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, is kind of those outside groups. Is that more or less correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do those, when we talk about the poll workers, you named off a bunch of different titles. Who are those people that are on that kind of grouping?
Yeah, and there are some terms that kind of get thrown around, and was even asked, what's the difference between a poll worker and an election inspector? It's semantics, and it really is probably up to your local election official how they refer to them. They are basically one and the same. But the captains are the ones who are receiving the AV list. They're the ones that are accounting for the fact if we brought them an AV list with 50 voters on it, that their table, once they've opened those 50 envelopes, that they ended up with 50 ballots. They have 50 envelopes, 50 ballots, and they're accounting for that and balancing to that before that runs through a machine.
So when you say the captain, is that the person that's in charge of that precinct and,
Yes.
and the inspectors and the workers and everybody else?
Right.
Okay. And then how does the clerk's office normally play in? Are they actually in that room all day, or will they be in and out of that room?
So the clerk's office for us, we're going to be in and out. So to be honest with you, I am stopping in there every once in a while to check and see how things are going. My deputy clerk is going to be in there much more frequently, but that's because I oversee the precincts on election day. I oversee all of it, but she and I split the task of I oversee all 32 of our precincts to make sure they're going okay, troubleshooting throughout the day, answering phone calls, that sort of thing. So my deputy clerk in Rochester Hills is actually who you would see in there more frequently. You might see the actual election specialist from your community coming in there if there were to be any issues or anything like that. The deputy clerk and the election specialist might come in there, or they might have to take an envelope with that table captain into the clerk's office to pull up the qualified voter file to check on a particular ballot.
So the clerk's office is over, you said 32 different precincts in your jurisdiction, for instance, right? And then the absentee counting board is just one of those 32 or 33
Actually,
precincts.
we consider that 32 more precincts because they are standalone. They get accounted for standalone. Their results get reported separately. So we report from the precinct, and we also report from the absentee counting board room. So for instance, if you are looking at Oakland County's website on election night and you're watching as it's showing communities reported, they split it off in 2 ways. They do a partially reported and a full reported. A partially reported means that maybe the precinct has reported its results, but the absentees have not. Or it could be vice versa. The absentees for that precinct have been reported, but the precinct has not. It doesn't tell you which one has been reported, it just will say partially reported. And that's what that means, is one of the two has reported. So once the absentees have reported and the precincts have reported, it will then change colors on their map and it will say fully reported.
So, Tina, when we talk about mail-in ballots being a big thing this year, what percentage in your jurisdiction do you anticipate of voters actually voting by mail instead of voting in person?
So what we've been averaging, so actually after Proposal 18.3 passed in November of 2018, we had our first election in August of 2019 in the city of Rochester Hills. Over 81% of the ballots cast in the August 2019 election in Rochester Hills were done by absentee ballot. So in this last election, we're all looking at probably 75%. As I've already told you, as of Monday, 50% of my registered voters are going to have an absentee ballot in Rochester Hills, and it's not even October 1st yet. So I highly anticipate that we're going to easily get to around that 75% marker are going to vote absentee.
So if I can make a side note real quick, the reason we've chosen to do AV counting board training today and why we're asking challengers to go into these AV challenging boards is because you could go to 32 separate precincts, and we could put one of those people in all 32 of those to try to get at 20% of the vote, or we could just put as many as we can in these big rooms that are going to have 80% of the votes coming in. So that's why we're focused on the AV counting boards, and for us, we're focused on some of the major ones, not just jurisdictions that may have a few thousand people, but ones that have tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. So that's why, if you're wondering why we're focusing on the AV counting boards rather than the precincts, because I know a lot of people in here probably vote in person, as I like to vote in person. That's why we're not focusing so much on the in-person, is because we're getting more bang for our buck in making sure that we're going to the AV counting boards.
I think it's important to know, too, there was a law that was passed this year that allowed county clerks to contract with local election officials to count their absentee ballots for them. So, for instance, in Oakland County in August, the Oakland County Clerk's Office actually contracted with 16 communities to count their absentee ballots. So I believe they were at the Oakland Schools building there, but so that was 16 jurisdictions had their absentee ballots being counted in the same absentee counting board in that room. So they had a mass quantity at that location. So just so you know that they do have the ability now, that was a law passed this year, to contract with their local clerks. A lot of the smaller jurisdictions did that because they didn't have the funding for new machines. They also didn't have logistically a place to put an absentee counting board. But the way that works is on Monday at 4 p.m., the Oakland County Clerk's Office will gather all of the ballots from those jurisdictions that they have contracted with and bring those ballots in to count those on Tuesday. The difference being is that anything that the clerk's office that contracted with the county receives after 4 p.m., that clerk has to deliver those absentee ballots to the precinct, and their precinct workers have to process those absentee ballots. So that would never work in a city like the city of Rochester Hills, for me to give them all of my ballots to process that I have received as of 4 p.m. on Monday, because I get 15% of my ballots come back on election day. So 15% of about 30,000, if I were to send those out to my precincts on election day, it would overwhelm my precincts, and it would also cause long lines. So that's not feasible for a large community.
So we've talked a little bit about the election workers. We've talked about the clerk's office coming in from outside, coming in and out to help. Will we expect to see other poll challengers and poll watchers from other groups in there?
I think absolutely. I mean, we all recognize the fact that regardless of which party that you favor, that we all feel like our belief systems are on the line, right? And so everybody is passionately fighting for what they believe in, and they want to make sure they're protecting their vote. So all partisan groups, as well as a lot of voter rights advocacy groups, are going to plant themselves in these absentee counting boardrooms, because as already mentioned, if you're looking to get the biggest quantity and the biggest saturation in one place, obviously that's going to be in your absentee counting boards.
Now, can anybody off the street go in and become a poll challenger, or do you have to come in through a group?
So you have to come in through a group, and there are specific groups that you can apply with, one of those being a political party, and I think we have a slide that lists all of those on there. But you have to be credentialed. So you can't just walk in and decide that you want to be a challenger in the absentee county boardroom. You do have to be registered. You do have to be show the credentials of what group that you're with when you come in there on that day. And no candidate has the right to actually appoint a challenger. So I can't say, Kent, I want you to be a challenger just for my campaign. Has to be appointed by, again, a party or one of these advocacy groups that we'll go over in a little bit.
Okay, so can you just kind of, and these slides are mainly the Election Integrity Fund slides. I know that you haven't seen all the slides.
Right.
What I'm asking you to do is, can you tell us a little bit about what your view of a poll challenger is, what their responsibilities are, what they can expect on Election Day?
Sure. So absolutely. Are you speaking in a precinct or in just in the absentee county
We're
board?
focused on the AV counting
Okay,
boards.
All right. So really, what my opinion is of your role is to make sure that everything's being done correctly, right? That the integrity of the process is being kept intact. And so I want to thank all of you as an election official myself, that you are taking the time out of your day to come in and actually learn what you're supposed to do, what your rights are, and what you're allowed to observe. So again, you're making sure that the election inspectors are following the task that the law requires them to do, and that they're doing it without bias, and that they're doing it in a way that, again, upholds the integrity of that process. So you are making sure that we are doing our jobs correctly. That is your role. But your role also is for you to learn what your job is and my job is, to make sure that you know what I'm supposed to be doing and what those election inspectors are supposed to be doing.
Okay, I'm a Virginia voter. Can I be a poll challenger on Election Day?
No.
Okay.
You have to be a registered voter in the state of Michigan.
Okay, are there any other requirements for being a poll challenger?
Yeah, so you have to be 18, you have to be a registered voter, and again, you have to be credentialed, and you have to be registered with one of the groups that are allowed to come in.
Okay. Now, can we move forward a little bit? And I want to ask you a little bit about, go ahead, you can move forward on that. I think that's some of the stuff that you went over, and we tried to put those in the slides so that people can take them away with them. How long of a day can we expect in this unprecedented election right now?
Well, all I'm going to say to you is bring a lot of food, bring some snacks, bring your waters. It's going to be a long day, folks. Okay, so let me give you an example. In August of this year at our election, in the city of Rochester Hills, we processed just over 16,000 absentee ballots. I had already tripled the size of my absentee county boardroom in anticipation that I wanted to train them all on what to expect, so when November came along, they would have already been through it once, right? So I still already had a massive amount of people, more than I've ever had. In Rochester Hills, we also have 4 high-speed tabulators. That's more than most clerks have, I guarantee you that too. So we basically have a fast system in place, and we have educated and qualified people in there. And we started at 7 a.m., which the law allowed, starting opening those absentee ballots and processing them. We reported our results at 11 p.m. So I want you to think about that, because what I've just told you is I'm anticipating that we're going to double that amount for November. And so 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. to process just over 16,000, I'm going to probably double that. I personally don't see us reporting in Rochester Hills before 4 a.m. If we do, I'm going to be super excited about that. I always plan on election day as at least a 24-hour day for me. I'm up at 3 a.m. and I don't usually get home until after 3 a.m. So you should plan for the same.
And what we want to do is we want to organize our teams well, and that's why we are focused on 7 boards, and people have come to us and said, well, can you do this one and this one? And so far we've said, no, we want to do these 7 and we want to do them well. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we have both men and women on each team, depending on what jurisdiction that you're going into. Some people have expressed concern about the safety of going into certain areas. We're going to make sure that there's a lawyer on each team. We want to make sure that everybody is fed throughout the day, and we want to make sure there's a lot of people on the teams because we know that not everyone's going to be able to stay that long. But we're working on trying to figure out if there's a way, and I think there's legislation, there's court cases out there, so we're going to get your emails today so that we can stay in contact about what to expect. Right now there's some litigation that's kind of thrown the doors wide open, but we're not really sure what to expect, whether it's going to be one long day, whether it's going to be multiple days, and maybe if it becomes multiple days, you volunteer just to do one of those days, and you get off at a good time. We just don't know yet. And so as we keep in contact with you, we should be able to let you know more towards the election.
Senate Bill 757 has passed the Senate and has passed the House, and I believe it's just waiting on the governor's signature, and she's indicated she will do that. So I believe what you're speaking to is the fact that Senator Johnson, former Secretary of State Johnson, has a Senate bill out there that she put together that would allow clerks to start pre-processing on Monday, the day prior to the election. So let me tell you what that consists of. On Monday, what we would be allowed to do from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. is basically at that point, we're allowed to open the envelope. So we're allowed to open the envelope, pull the ballot out of the envelope, and it has to stay in the secrecy sleeve. Okay, so it has to stay in the secrecy sleeve. We're allowed then to take those ballots already in the secrecy sleeve, bundle them in groups of 25, 50, or 100, whatever the clerk wants to do. That's not specifically called out, but that we have to keep the ballots still in the secrecy sleeve. At that time, we're comparing the stub on the ballot. So if I've issued you ballot number 1,000, your label on the outside should show 1,000, and the stub on your ballot should show 1,000. Once we confirm that is correct, the envelope and the ballot in the secrecy sleeve will be separated. The envelopes will be gathered and placed in a box together, and the ballots still in the secrecy sleeve will be bundled, and they will be put into a sealed approved state container and be sealed by a Republican and a Democrat, and would be opened on Tuesday to be counted on Tuesday. So that is the process that I'm sure the governor is going to sign this, and so this is what we're looking at will happen. And that is trying to help us with, again, the fact that, as I mentioned, we're looking at doubling our absentee numbers and trying to keep it from being a 24 to 30-hour day for clerks.
Thank you. And can you go to the next slide? I want to mention this on the next slide. We want to know, what is the goal? What are we trying to accomplish on election day? And I think we're trying to accomplish a few things. Where if somebody sees you there and they see that somebody is watching the process, they may be less likely to do something wrong that they were thinking about doing. So that's the number one goal. The number two goal is, if you see them doing something wrong, we want to stop it. We want to say something. We're going to explain that process to you. But that's really our second goal, is let's stop it if it's happening. Our third goal is, if you see something happening, you've reported it, you've gone through the proper channels, and we're going to have Tina talk about that a little bit, is to note it down. And we're going to talk to you about what actually to mark down here, so that we can bring it up later if there's a discrepancy, if there's a problem. Let's make sure that it's properly noted so we can bring it up after you actually leave the precinct.
One thing I want to be clear on, the reason why we're telling you to bring your own food, snacks, waters, that sort of thing, is you are sequestered. So you cannot come and go from my absentee counting board room. Once you enter the absentee counting board room, you're in my absentee counting board room, okay? So I want you to understand that if you get there at 7 a.m. and you decide at noon that you're hungry and you didn't bring any food, that's going to be tough luck for you, because you're not leaving at noon to go out and get a lunch and come back. Because you have been in there, you have observed ballots, you have observed the process, and you can't go out and share that information with other people. And that is why you are sequestered. So that means you also cannot bring your electronic devices into my absentee counting board room. That goes for my inspectors too. As soon as they walk in, we have a basket, everybody puts their phone in there, and it's a hard, fast rule that you are not allowed to access your electronic devices while you're in the absentee counting board room.
So I think about that Abe Lincoln quote where he says, if he's going to chop down a tree, get 8 hours to chop down a tree, he'll take the first 6 sharpening his axe. So I feel like we've got some context now about who the players are, what the roles are going to be. So now I'd like to actually have you talk a little bit about what is the challenger doing. And this is really where the training on what the job is will start. And this slide is not, I wanted to go to this slide, but really it goes back towards the beginning where we're talking about seal and serial number checks, right? Is that the first thing that they do when they go in the morning?
So it's also going to depend on what types of machines that they have, if they have scanners or they have high-speed tabulators on them. But yes, we are comparing serial numbers and seal numbers on machines because we test the programming, and it is programmed. Once we test the programming, we have to seal it up so that we know that nobody has messed with that machine prior to Election Day. So we have staff that are going to be doing that. They're going to be printing a zero report tape so that we know that nothing on that machine has calculated a vote prior to the opening of those polls. So they're printing off that zero tape too, and that's an important part of the process in the morning, is to make sure that no one has tampered with that machine prior to the first ballot being cast on Election Day.
If I go all the way back to page 2 of our handout, which is going to be this slide, is that?
So this is actually a scanner. Another thing to make note of is that in the state of Michigan, we actually have 3 different vendors. Okay, so you could be in one county, like Oakland, where we use Hart. And you might be in another county, like Ingham County, where they use Dominion. You could be in Kalamazoo County, and they use ES&S. So the state of Michigan has 3 approved vendors. So the machines are going to look different from each county to each county, depending on who their vendor is. So what you're seeing here is a Hart scanner. So on their paper poll book that they have to go through, and you can see that it says tabulator serial number, and it has VAT serial number. The VAT serial number is not something you're going to see in the absentee counting board room, because that is the ADA device, and that is only in the precinct. Okay, so that is the machine that if they came into the precinct in any way, shape, or form, they had a disability, and voting a paper ballot by hand for them was a challenge. We have machines there they can use. And so we have to seal and test those also. So this is where the serial numbers are located on there. We assign that particular serial number to that precinct. They have to confirm that the machines that they received match that number. And then you can see up here in the upper right-hand corner where that seal is at. Below that is actually where the V drives, which have the programming for the election on there, are under that compartment, and that stays sealed throughout the day, also in the precinct.
So as I've mentioned, we want to do this well, and so we're actually going to tell you what jurisdiction, when we figure out which jurisdiction you're in, we're going to tell you what machine they're using, and that'll give us a little bit more clarity going in. Now, I'm kind of a simple thinker, so when I think about what does the poll challenger do when they go in there, you've explained a little bit about what the process the clerk is going through. What is the poll challenger marking down, and what are they looking for on the tape?
On the tape, you have the right to ask to look at equipment. You can't touch it, but you can look at the equipment at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day to look at the total. You can ask to see the zero report, to see that they started with a zero, so you can ask to see that. Again, you can't touch equipment, but you can look at it and observe the process.
Will they even open it up and show us inside the bins and show us that there's no paper ballots in there?
They can do that. Okay. I don't see why not. The only thing I would say is that some of the communities send their ballot boxes out already sealed with a seal already on it. So that way, because we have to deliver our equipment the day prior. So in a precinct, for instance, the ballot box is going to be sealed. In an absentee counting board room on a high speed, there is no ballot box on a high speed.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like we're focused on 2 things first thing in the morning. It's making sure that the tape says that there's been 0 ballots counted so far, and then you're also looking at all the different places. These tabulators look like printers, right? They look similar to printers. They look very similar,
so they have a tablet in them that actually looks like a really large iPad, is what it looks like. And so it looks like a suitcase, and when you open it up, it has a tablet in there that looks like this, that looks like a bulky iPad is what it looks like.
And so do we want to make sure that either there's a seal on each place on the machine where you can put ballots into? Do we want to either make sure it's empty and see with our own eyes, or make sure that there's a seal that hasn't been broken yet?
So with the absentee counting board room, it's a little bit differently because it depends on how many precincts have been programmed for that particular scanner. They might have to switch out their V drives throughout the day as they're using each precinct. So at the precinct, it is sealed, it is locked. In the absentee counting board room, they might run all of precinct 7 through, but they have to take the V drive out when they're done running precinct 7 and put the precinct 8 in when they're gonna run that one through on the machine. So in the absentee counting board room, it is probably not going to be locked and sealed throughout the day. On the high-speed machine, we're going to have one machine that's gonna run about 9 different precincts on that one machine.
So I know the tabulating will take place later in the day. So is this going to be something that happens in the morning where they're going in and they're checking the tape and making sure that it starts at 0?
Yes.
Does that happen for each USB drive that they put in for each precinct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I understand in like a place like Detroit, which we're hoping to be in, there'll be over, and I think Bob's going to talk about that a little bit at the end, and Ms. Sheridan's going to speak a little bit about that. There'll be over 100 precincts in one area.
Yes.
So that'll be one USB drive for each precinct, is that correct?
Well, it depends again if they're using high-speed machines, which I'm assuming that they are in Detroit. Yes. Okay. I figured that they were.
Okay. So in summary on this responsibility first thing in the morning, if you could just give us the I know you've reviewed it, but just the bullet points so we can write them down. What do they want to make sure they write down?
The most important thing, first thing in the morning, is that you have, number one, I would say balance in your precinct board, that you don't have 5 Republicans or 5 Democrats all on one absentee counting boardroom. So you could ask, is there precinct, do you have balance in your precincts with equal number of parties registered here? And if they have a high-speed machine, do you have a Republican and a Democrat running that high-speed machine? Or the scanner as feeding the ballots in, are Republicans and Democrats doing that together? You can ask about, do you have adjudication teams? If you have adjudication teams and duplicating teams, are they balanced? Do you have a Republican and a Democrat? And then can I see the 0 report?
Okay. So I think what we're going to add to this, and this is not in the PowerPoint slide today, is all the different roles that we should expect to see a Republican and a Democrat in. So it seems like you'd want to go in there and introduce yourself, understand who the precinct captain is, understand the roles, and then you can start making sure that there's a Republican and Democrat for each position there's supposed to be one.
So as clerks, we're actually required to send a list of assigned workers to each party prior to the election. So before every election, as a clerk, I have to send a list of all of the inspectors that I have assigned to every single precinct, as well as my absentee counting boardroom. I have to send that to each county party so that they can see I have equal representation on each of those boards.
Okay, so now that we've talked about opening up the precinct, I want to talk a little bit about the big step that I view poll challengers being involved in, which is this verification process, right? How do you view, and this is the one we've called step 3, and I think it's PowerPoint 35 is where we start at. After the clerks have already received the ballots, the clerks have checked the signatures before Election Day, they bring the ballots down into the AV Counting Board, correct?
Yes.
And we've already talked about what our poll challengers will do when they go in there. They'll introduce themselves. They'll mark if there's equal number of Republicans and Democrats. They'll make sure to look at the tape to make sure that it starts at 0. What happens next?
So at that point, we're going to bring what we call our first run of ballots into the absentee counting boardroom. So for instance, throughout the day, we could do multiple runs is what we call it. So we have them broke up in batches. Our first run is going to consist of every ballot that we have received prior to Election Day. So everything that we received up until the end of the day on Monday is going to be included in our first run. And that's because we've already signature checked it and we've already received it into the qualified voter file system. So if we have 1,200 ballots for Precinct 7, we're going to wheel out in trays to that particular county boardroom. Precinct 7, we're going to provide the table captain with a voter list for that particular precinct that says that we gave them 1,200 ballots, and she can see on that report that it shows that we should have 1,200. So after they open all of those, they're going to count again to make sure not only did we have 1,200 envelopes, but we also had 1,200 ballots. And we're checking for that because we actually have people that have sealed up their envelopes and sent them back to us with no ballot in it. And so we need to account for how many envelopes do we have, how many ballots do we have, because there is possibility that the numbers could be different. It also can be the possibility where we have seen a husband and wife or 2 people put their ballot in one envelope. And so that's why we count every single step along the way to make sure that we're balancing, because they might send that in and there could be 2 ballots in there. And so you're going to have one more ballot than you're going to have envelopes. And so we're checking for all of those things along the way. And so it's important for you to make sure that they're getting a list of voters, that they have a total that they're matching to, that they have that number, and that's exactly how many ballots they have and how many envelopes they have. And we batch up our envelopes like in groups of 10 so that we can go through and count them quickly.
So my understanding is maybe a place like Detroit, which I know that you don't go to Detroit, but in talking to Ms. Sheridan and Mr. Cushman, there'll be one big room and there'll be just over 100 tables because they have over 100 precincts. And each table will be for one precinct. Is that how you do it in Rochester Hills?
So for us, we break up in districts, and each district is going to have a few tables, and that's because we have 8 precincts dedicated to each of the 4 districts. But they are only processing one precinct at a time. We're not blending ballots in there. So it's one precinct at a time is being processed, and we're super hardcore on you better balance. And so that's why we do one at a time, because you don't want to get your numbers mixed up.
All right, so if we see one precinct, we'll see like a fold-out table here, right? There'll be a fold-out table, and there'll be people sitting there with the ballots from one precinct. Is that correct? And those are the batches that you talked about them bringing downstairs, right? The clerks will bring the pile of ballots down there that will still be in the envelopes.
Correct.
And who will be sitting at that table as poll workers or poll inspectors?
So typically you're going to have a table captain that's going to be kind of standing up, walking around that table, watching them. And then we usually have 5 people at a table, 2 across from each other, and then the table captain that is standing. You'll have an individual who is responsible for opening that ballot up, opening the envelope, pulling the ballot in the secrecy sleeve out, and then all that person is doing at that point is they are checking the stub, making sure that it matches the label on the envelope. So if I issued you ballot number 1000, does that stub say 1000 and your label says 1000 on it? Once they confirm that ballot in the envelope is going to go to the next person. That the envelope itself is going to get put in a box and get bundled. The ballot in the secrecy sleeve is going to travel to the next person. And the reason that we do that is because that next person is the one who's going to tear the stub off, and they're going to pull the ballot out of the secrecy sleeve at that point. And so this allows that ballot to remain an anonymous vote. You don't want the person who saw the envelope with the person's name on it, with the stub on it, with the number, being the one who actually pulls the ballot out of the secrecy sleeve, because they could look at that and they could say, I know that this is how Tina Barton voted because I see her envelope, I see her label, and I just pulled this out and I can see her vote. So 2 different people should be doing that process. One person opening the envelope, pulling it out. The next person is actually pulling the ballot out of the secrecy sleeve and tearing the stub off. And then sometimes you have a third person there who's going to do what we call back folding of the ballots, and that's because the ballots can be so long, they can be like 21 inches long, and so because of that they have to be back folded. You might have somebody standing there back folding them. That way when we run them through the machines, they don't jam.
So as I'm a poll challenger and I'm standing here watching this process, it sounds like I'm near the table, and I know that there can only be one poll challenger per precinct. So there'll be one poll challenger from the EIF assigned to that table. So as they look, they're looking to make sure that the number on the stub of the ballot matches the number on the envelope. Okay, and we're going to talk about what works, what we're looking for to go right, and then we're going to talk about what happens when it doesn't match up and what our role and responsibility is. But I think it's good that we know the proper process for how that looks. Right. So then at the end, they're going to stack all these ballots up, and they're going to be ready to be counted, correct?
Right. So at that point too, when they have pulled the ballot out and they're looking at, they're back folding the ballot, they're also at that time looking for problems with the ballot. Like, did they spill coffee on it? For some reason that the ballot might need to be duplicated. Is the ballot ripped? Is there some reason that it's not going to go through our machine properly? And so they're determining at that time to make sure that the ballot is in good shape to go through the machine so it doesn't ruin any of our machines. If it's not, that ballot is going to have to be duplicated. If you have a ballot that is duplicated in an absentee counting boardroom, you have to have a Republican and a Democrat sitting down together to duplicate the ballot. Okay, so you have on the ballot, so you're going to have the ballot that is the bad ballot because it's been destroyed somehow, and then we're going to have a set of ballots for that precinct that are blank that are going to be dedicated just for duplication. So on the ballot that is a problem ballot, we're going to write at the top ORIG, usually number 1. That means that's the original number 1. Okay, so that's the ballot that was bad. on the duplicated ballot that goes with that ballot, we would put dupe number 1. So that we know this is original number 1, this is duplicated number 1. So that if someone were to go back and to look to make sure that the duplication team actually duplicated that ballot as cast correctly onto the duplicated ballot, we could do that. Okay, so you have the original one, duplicated one. They're transferring those votes from the ballot that was ruined somehow to the duplicated ballot, which is a new ballot, so that it can go through the machine. So that is another step of what they're looking for at that time.
So the inspector will turn it over and they'll write it in pencil on the back?
So it is typically, no, that is a challenge ballot.
Okay.
So, but the duplicated ballots, usually every absentee county boardroom will have teams of duplicators. Especially in large elections, they'll need teams of people that are there to do that because people do a lot of funky things to their ballots. And so we have to have teams of them, a Republican and a Democrat doing that.
So after they do this and will they make a note of this on a poll list? Or can you talk about what kind of poll, some people could say a poll book, you and I talked about a poll list. What kind of document will they have with voters' names on it in the
Okay, so most likely you're going to get a voter list for that precinct is what it's going to be. It's going to be titled voter list on there, and it will show every absentee ballot that we have received up to that point, and what the total of those were for that particular list. So it would have the ballot number, the person it was issued to, and the date we received it on there. And when that is brought out to your to that table captain, that's the list that they are going to have. We don't use electronic poll books in the absentee county boardroom in Rochester Hills. I'm not sure if they're doing that down in any of the larger cities, but that is not something that we do. We are giving paper printouts of voter lists to each of them, and they're checking that if I said 50 ballots, like I mentioned earlier, that we're giving you 50 ballots, yes, you handed me 50 ballots, and this list shows that you have received on 50 ballots.
Now, if everything goes right and all the ballots match the envelopes, all the numbers on the stubs match the envelopes, there's, like you said, 50 ballots and 50 people on the poll list, will they mark anything on the poll list?
For us, we're just checking off that everything balanced correctly, so we're putting a checklist on there, but we're not going through and checking off each individual name. We're checking the total issue, because at that point, my staff has already checked each and every single one of those ballots and names and numbers on there to the list.
So it sounds like a poll challenger's job would be easy if there's a precinct where every name, every number on the envelope matches every stub, and there's 50 ballots and 50 people on the list. There wouldn't be any problems there, right?
Right.
Okay.
In a perfect world.
In a perfect world, all right. So what happens, let's keep going through the perfect process before we talk about some of the process. So then we've got, in that case, of 50 ballots. What happens to those 50 ballots?
So at that point, once, and again, we have high-speed tabulators. So once that team has concurred that the 50 ballots we've given them, that they do have 50 ballots in hand, that would then get taken over to our high-speed tabulator and ran through our tabulator at that time. Now, another thing, as I mentioned, that you're going to see could vary by county is the adjudication process. And that might be different because we have different pieces of equipment. So some of us have the ability to adjudicate on screen, and I'll tell you what that means in a minute in case you're not familiar with that term, or if the attorney wants to explain that to you. But it could be that some equipment, for instance, I believe in Ingham County, the Dominion equipment, they process on one tabulator and they actually have another machine separately that they adjudicate on. So it's going to depend on which county you're in, what type of machines they're using. So in Oakland County, I'm going to speak to Hart because that's what I use and that's what I'm most familiar with. As they run a batch through, for instance, we are running filters on there to make sure that the machine is picking up any irregularities on the ballot. So for instance, a stray mark. Did somebody accidentally, their pen run across the page? And it'll pick up on those types of issues. And anytime it picks up an irregularity like that, we have filters on our software that makes us stop and look at that ballot and see if there's a problem with it. A Republican and a Democrat have to sit there and do that together and make the determination of whether or not that ballot has an issue or whether the ballot can go forward or if it needs to be duplicated. And so those filters are set on there. And again, a Republican and a Democrat are the ones running that through that high-speed tabulator. They know that if we gave them 50 ballots, that when they're done, their ballot counter should show that 50 ballots went through that machine.
So it sounds like the challenger at that point wouldn't have much of a role if the Republicans and Democrats are agreeing that this ballot needs to be properly duplicated, and they agree on this was a vote for Biden. They both agree it's a vote for Biden, and it should be translated as a vote for Biden.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And I think one thing that's really important to recognize is, especially in August, as clerks, we had a really hard time getting people to sign up to be poll workers and to be election inspectors, poll workers, whichever term you want to use. And so we were really feeling desperate at this point to get them. And I know even in the city of Detroit, they were down 900 people. And they needed more election inspectors. And so with that problem, you have to understand that we have to do our best to provide party balance. But to be honest with you, if I'm in a community that leans one way and the other party's not sending any inspectors my way, it makes it really tough for us to do that. So prior to coming to Rochester Hills, I worked in Bloomfield Township. And I was there for 16 years. In the 16 years I was there, Bloomfield was a pretty Republican community. And it would be really difficult for us to get election inspectors that were Democrats. And the same thing happens in left-leaning communities. They have a hard time finding Republicans that will come there and be inspectors. So it's up to the parties to look at the assignments that they're receiving. As I mentioned, we have to give them a list of everybody we're assigning for each county. Your party should be making sure that you are equally represented in those communities. And if you are not, you need to be asking yourself, why not? So you need to make sure you have election inspectors there that represent your party preference. That's extremely important.
Now I want to talk about the closeout of this process, and the challenger's role in that, and then I want to move to when there's something wrong, how do we correct it? And then I want to take some questions. So we'll keep moving along to, we talked about the ballots at the end. So what happens when the ballots are correct? What happens next?
So at that point, once we ran them through, like I mentioned, we're going to do what we call multiple runs throughout the day. So the second set is going to be basically all the ballots that came in maybe overnight on Monday night and then until about maybe noon on Tuesday. And we're going to take all those ballots, make sure again, everything's been signature checked, everything's been received in on the qualified voter file. That's going to be our second batch. So say in the first batch we had 50 ballots and this time we have 75. We want to make sure, does the report show that we now have 125 ballots? And when we physically count them, we physically have 125 envelopes and 125 ballots. So we're balancing that throughout the day with each of the runs that we bring back there based on the batches that we are receiving in for that particular precinct in the qualified voter file and getting those ready for tabulation.
Okay, when they're ready for tabulation, what happens then?
That's again when they're going to either your scanners, which we had a picture of earlier of what the scanner looks like. Some clerks use scanners like what you see in the precinct. A lot of the smaller communities use those. A lot of the larger communities are using high-speed tabulators.
Was this one?
Yeah, so this is the scanner, what that's going to look like. When I said it looks like a suitcase.
Now, do you have your water over there? Okay.
I do.
Now, when there's now that the ballots are counted, will there be a reading that prints out on that, or how will that work? Let's just use the example of the 50 ballots like we talked about. So the 50 ballots are from one precinct are run through. What happens next?
So what we print at that time are batch summary reports. It doesn't print totals for the candidates for us. What it prints on there in the batch summary report are how many ballots did the tabulator read in for that precinct. So that we know that, because that's a continual tabulation, right? So we don't want to print any running totals for candidates. What we want are how many ballots actually went through in that batch. So we're looking at the batch reports as to how many ballots went through. We're not looking for candidate totals. We're looking for batch reports.
Now, do you normally see the challenger that was with that precinct go over to the tabulator, or do you normally see teams that have a different person over at the tabulator? How do you normally see that happen?
That's probably going to vary on how many people in total that you actually have in your whole room and dispersed throughout. And if you're concerned if the reason that you're there is you're concerned that they're not tabulating properly, or are you more concerned that they're not equally having party representation, those sorts of things. So I think you need to understand what your goal is and what it is you're looking for, what's the most important thing to you, and you need to put your resources there.
And I think that's what we're going to have a team captain in each one of our AV county boards that we're focused on that's going to have an entire strategy for this. So what's the one takeaway we can tell a challenger after the votes are tabulated? What will they want to mark down on their sheets? What are they looking for if you're a challenger?
So again, for us, because we're operating in batches, you could keep track of the tabulation of batches for that precinct throughout the day. So precinct 7, batch number 1 had 50 ballots. That's actually, we have a tally sheet that we do that with in our own office. And we're keeping track of our batches throughout the day for each particular precinct so that we know that we're matching our totals throughout the day.
Okay, so that's kind of a summary of the process. The process when it works correctly, right? But what challengers are there to do is make sure that we're ready to correct things when things don't go correctly. So at this point, I want to back up to what I've been calling the step 3 process, which we talked at length about. And that's when I kind of envisioned this folded out table with the 2 workers on each side and the precinct captain walking around, and our poll challenger is going to be there watching that table. So what's an example of something a poll challenger might see that's not correct, that's not properly working, and that they may want to make a note of?
Well, again, you want to make sure that they're matching the stubs on the ballots to the envelopes to make sure that they match correctly. That's one of the most important things. Because again, if I issued you ballot number 1,000, that label should show 1,000, the stub should show 1,000. So one of the most important things is, are they matching the labels on the outer envelope to the stub number to make sure that that is that person's ballot. So that's really important. Again, I would watch duplication. Are they actually duplicating the ballots as they were cast on the ballot? So if they have duplicating teams, that you have someone who's watching the duplication of ballots to make sure that they are transferring the votes correctly, and the adjudication to make sure that if they're adjudicating ballots that they're doing that correctly.
Okay, so I want to look at, and I'm going to point you in your handout to one of the last slides that we have. And it says precinct, reason for challenge, and ballot number. So Tina, if you're the inspector and you're sitting there at the table, and let's say for example it's precinct 32. So I'm a challenger, I'm going to write down 32 because that's the precinct I'm overseeing. And I see you open up an envelope and it's got 100 on the envelope, but the ballot stub says 99, and they clearly don't match. And let's say for some reason the inspector's not doing their job properly, which is unlikely, but let's say they were. What does the challenger do then? And I'm going to ask them on this sheet, the reason for the challenge, I would say it doesn't match, 99 and 100, it doesn't match, and then the ballot number.
Right.
How would you address that?
So you need to find your table captain first. Who's the table captain? And you need to point out the discrepancy to the table captain and let them know that envelope label said ballot number 1,000, but the ballot that is in there is ballot number 750. They don't match. So you should report that to the table captain. If the table captain doesn't do anything about that, you should ask to speak to the head election official. So at that time, it's going to be either me or my deputy clerk. You should ask to speak to one of us to handle that situation if the table captain is not curing that situation properly.
So when we talk about the election inspectors and those poll worker teams, will there not be a captain over top of all the other, over all the precincts? That'll be somebody from the clerk's office that's in charge?
Yes, so in Rochester Hills, as I mentioned, we split that up. I typically will oversee all of everything that's happening in all 32 of the precincts. My deputy clerk is going to oversee the absentee county boardroom. You will have one of the 2 of us assigned to the absentee county boardroom to make sure, again, both of us are going to be in and out of there, but she's going to be a presence that is going to be in the room constantly, in and out, so that they can pull that person in there, and if there are any issues, they can explain that to her.
All right, let me throw like an unlikely question at you. What if, because we're going to be in these AV counting boards where we probably don't know, a lot of these people will be a lot of people, but what if you see somehow an address and a name, and you think to yourself, I know that person doesn't live here anymore, or I know that person's 17 and they shouldn't have voted. But nobody at the table is going to know that. What do you do then as a challenger?
So I think it's really important that you're basing your challenges on factual information. So if you think that that was Johnny that voted that, I would just be careful. I think there was one of the slides that even speaks to that, being careful about making assumptions or making false accusations, because that is a problem if you do that. So you need to make sure that you have factual information, and if you want to challenge a voter's status, say that person did live next door to you, and you're like, I know that person, and they shouldn't have voted in this precinct, or they moved out of there last year, they shouldn't have had a ballot. Again, you're challenging that voter's ability to vote, and you need to find the table captain. Again, bring that to the attention of the table captain, and if they don't bring it to our attention, you need to ask to speak to one of your head election officials.
This reminded me when I was a prosecutor, where we'd have a police officer who would stop a vehicle, and they'd have to give it. When we were doing the suppression hearing, where the defendant would try to suppress the evidence, the officer would have to give a reason why he stopped the car, and the officer saying, I had a hunch.
Yeah.
He was in the wrong. It was late at night, and he looked like a bad guy. That wasn't never going to be enough. They had to be able to articulate something tangible.
Correct.
I saw them leaving a known drug house in the middle of the night, and they had an out-of-state license. They had to be able to articulate facts that could show there was actual reasonable basis to believe that person. That's kind of what it reminded me of here, because you can actually get in trouble if you kind of just say, oh, I had a hunch. You can't just challenge everyone. You have to have a reason to believe that, right?
That's correct.
And
that's why it's just as important for you to understand not only your responsibilities as a challenger, but you need to make sure you understand what our responsibilities are as election inspectors and election officials, so that you know what we should be doing.
And I think, so we use the example of 17. I think the same thing if you have, I mean, you don't have to be 100% right, but you just have to have a reason to say, hey, listen, I have a good reason to believe this. So if you think that the person on there is deceased, it would be the same process, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, what about if you see a ballot and for some reason the inspector doesn't catch it, doesn't want to do anything, and they voted for both the Biden-Harris ticket as well as the Trump-Pence ticket? What would you do then? What would your response be as a challenger?
So what you have to understand is there's a difference between counting a ballot and counting a vote. Okay? So we have to account for all the ballots. So if we issued 1,000 ballots, every ballot has to be accounted for, but it doesn't mean that every vote cast on the ballot is counted. And that's what the overvote situation is. So in that particular situation, you were talking about the ballot. Okay, we still have to account for the fact that if we brought in 1,000 ballots, that 1,000 ballots went through the tabulator. We don't pull a ballot and not run it through a tabulator because they overvoted. The ballot itself still counts, and it doesn't mean that all the votes counted that were cast on that ballot, okay? So if the ballot is read into the system, it is programmed to specifically look for overvoted races. So if, say, in the presidential race, they voted for both candidates, okay? That particular race is not going to count when the ballot is cast. The ballot itself, the counter on the ballot is going to go from 1 to 2, right? Because another ballot has gone through the scanner. So we have to account for the ballot going through. It doesn't necessarily mean that the vote was counted in that particular race. So overvoted races, that race will not count. But the rest of the races that were voted correctly on the ballot will count. Okay, so the ballots still have to be accounted for. The ballot still has to go through the tabulator. Even if they overvoted every single race on the ballot still has to go through because we still have to account for the fact that the ballot was cast. But the programming is set to not read overvoted races. And we test for that, just so you know. We are required by law, Michigan is one of the states that we are required by law to run logic and accuracy testing on every single machine that we use. And if we don't run the testing on that machine cannot be used on election day. Part of the logic and accuracy test is that we have to take test ballots and we have to overvote races. And we have to run it through the machine to make sure that the machine is not casting a vote for that candidate when we overvote in a race. Still has to count the ballot, it just can't count the vote. And that's two different things, and you need to make sure that you understand that.
Okay, so, and I'm going to shift a little bit to some Q&A, and Jeff, can we get Miss Sheridan in the blue? Can you mic her up as you guys have time? Because I think she's got a different perspective, and I'm going to want to introduce her in a minute as a challenger who's done this so many times. So let's say that there is a problem with the ballot. Let's say it's a torn ballot, or it's folded, and the inspectors don't believe that the machine is going to take it properly. And so, but it's kind of they're not sure whether the vote is for a Biden-Harris ticket or a Trump-Pence ticket. And so at that point, they're going to have to take it to I call it the transposer, the person that's going to transpose the votes from one ballot to the next ballot.
The duplicator.
And the duplicator, sorry. So what happens if the duplicator is doing something that you think is changing the ballot from one vote to a different vote?
Well, first of all, if I think they're doing that, I'm going to stop them. And I'm going to take a look at their work and see what they're doing. That's why you have a Republican and a Democrat doing that together. We did have a community in Oakland County several years ago, prior to my time in election administration. On the duplication team, they did catch where one person was incorrectly recording the votes. As a duplicator, they called their police department up at that time. They actually arrested that individual right then and there in the absentee county boardroom, and that person ended up going to jail. So it is something that we take very seriously. It's why you need to make sure that the parties have equal representation, because one person is marking votes and other person is reading them off, and then they should switch and read that back to each other to make sure that what the one person did, the other person agrees with. Okay.
Okay, I want to bring Marion Sheridan in on this conversation. Do you mind coming up here for us? And she's obviously, I think a lot of you know her, she's a longtime party activist, and I think she brings a different perspective on the poll challenging question. So I wanted to bring her in on this conversation because I think that she comes from a different side of it than Tina has. Can you give us a little bit of background about what you've done in poll challenging over the years?
Yeah, just the mic on.
Yeah.
I just want to know how loud I got it. So, yeah, I do recognize a lot of faces here, and prior to 2016, I had been a poll challenger in Precinct. But in 2016, I really got sucked in. And that the day before the election for President Trump at that time, our office got a call, and people wanted to, on the other end, wanted to know if we could find volunteers to go to Cobo Hall. And okay, I've been a poll challenger, but I certainly didn't know what was going on at Cobo Hall. So I pursued a little bit further because it was the day before the election, and the way that we could help, we certainly wanted to help. Come to find out that in the basement of Cobo Hall, they count 65,000 absentee ballots. Now this was 2016. That was a ton of ballots, especially in light of the fact that the president only won by 10,000, just under 11,000 votes. So just think about that. So when you walk into Cobo Hall, your knees buckle. The first time you walk in, you just can't even believe it. It's the size of a football field, and they have 137 counting boards. At each counting board, they count 5 or 6 precincts for a total of 505 precincts in the city of Detroit. So it's a pretty amazing sight, and especially when you think at that time they were calling for some Republicans to go in as poll challengers to oversee this process. Why there wasn't any Republicans working at that election? Yeah. And it's like, we don't know that. As grassroots people, we don't know that's taking place. We don't know that that's an area that we have to be concerned about. We think that everyone is like Tina. Our elections are being run accurately. It's very important to them to run accurate, fair elections. But when you get to a situation where you see that kind of mass number of votes being counted, it's very concerning. So luckily that year, within that short period of time, we worked for 8 hours to get volunteers. We found 28 people that would drop everything. And I mean, you have to vote absentee to do this kind of work.
Yes.
You have to vote, and these people had to vote immediately. They were racing to their clerk's office before they closed that day at 5 o'clock in order to vote by absentee ballot. And we told them, as Tina said, you need food. They had to bring it. We said, bring in your own food. We said, we don't know if there's a chair. Never done this before. Take a chair. You can't take your cell phones in, and we can't tell you how long you're going to work. And 28 people stepped up and did this. And these people, when they came back and realized what they had possibly done, just to be there, they were emotional about it. They've never been a part of something that could be so critical for our country. So it was really an incredible experience for them. I went down in 2018 as a poll challenger, and I can tell you, as Tina says, you have to watch the duplication process. At that time, they were hand duplicating ballots. They're always understaffed, and I'm going to talk about that sometime.
And we want to go to the Q&A because I want to hit you both, and I know Tina's got to go soon.
Okay, so, well, maybe I should skip that.
About recruiting poll.
No, the duplication process that
Okay.
we saw in 2018.
Okay, go ahead.
We would just see, they just never have enough poll workers. So you would see a poll worker sitting at a table with a stack of ballots, honest to God, and they would just be duplicating ballots on their own. No other person in sight. And sometimes they weren't even looking at the other ballot because, I think they just assumed, they're all filled out the same way. And so we would challenge. We would walk up at one time, those of you that know Penny Kreider, she walked up to a stack of ballots, called the captain over, and said, I challenge this stack. And she made him redo it all, so that was good.
Okay, so before I get to the questions, we want to do like a lightning round, so we'll get you to give your quickest answers. There's a lot of good questions in here. The most important thing about this is what happens when we challenge, right? So I think we've talked about our last slide. You put down the name of the actual election workers, the inspectors. You put down the precinct number. If it's a specific ballot you're concerned about, you put down the ballot number, and then you're going to mark down your own reason. And Tina, we talked about
just
this.
so you know, too, the local clerk is supposed to do that also. Inside our paper poll books, we have a page that says challenged voters. So if there is a challenge, your local clerk is also supposed to be documenting, or in that group should be documenting that there was a challenge, what the challenge was, why they challenged it, and again, what precinct, the ballot number. So we have to do that also. That's not just something you should be doing. We should be doing that too.
All right, so we appeal it to the captain, the precinct captain there at the table, right? And if they don't, and they either correct it or they don't, and if they don't, then we take it to the next level up, right? And that's somebody from the clerk's office.
Yes.
Okay, is there an appeals process after that, or is that as far as it goes, and then we just note it for another day?
Well, obviously, we're going to do our due diligence to look at the situation and see, is that a ballot that should have been pulled or not counted for some reason. So we're going to take it back to the qualified voter file, pull up that voter record. We're going to look at what, if it's something that the stub hasn't been torn off yet, if there's something that you're bringing to our attention at that point. We're going to do our due diligence and our homework to see should that ballot be counted or not.
All right, I'm going to run through these. I'm going to put the more legal ones to Tina and the more political ones to Sheridan, if that's all right. And then if you have another thought, throw up your hand. According to the state of Michigan rights and duties of a challenger, they are permitted to use a phone on page 10. How does the challenger contact the election board if needed, if the no phone is permitted?
Well, you can have a phone in the precinct. The absentee county boardroom and the precinct are different rules. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. If you're coming to the precinct, you can bring your phone with you. You can use that as a challenger because you could be seated right behind the table. There are a lot of different things that are, the rules are different. And I know we're not talking about precinct. So the precinct rules are a little different than they are for the absentee county boardroom. In the absentee county boardroom, you're sequestered. And again, we're doing that so that nobody could sit back there and start saying, okay, I just saw 5 votes come in for this person. You need to call people and get them out and get them to vote. That's why you're not allowed to have your phone in the absentee county boardroom, because we don't want someone sitting there from any party or any group giving out vote totals and sending it back to groups to get other voters out to vote in opposition.
Okay, so if we have people there for a 12-hour day, what do they do with their phones?
So we suggest people when they come to the city, leave it at home, lock it in your car if you want, and if not, then you're going to surrender it to me, because I'm going to ask you when you come in, do you have any devices on you at all? And if I hear somebody's phone ring, or anything like that, I am going to confiscate it, certainly. But yeah, we do a shakedown on everybody that comes in. You're not bringing electronic devices into my absentee counting board.
Okay, and we're gonna have a backup plan because I'm not going to Detroit without my phone. So we'll figure that out, guys. Can you distinguish between a Republican or a Democrat voter by outside of the original mailing envelope?
No. And I know that that's been a video that's been going around, that people are saying that they're concerned about the mail, that they're going to look at their envelope and they're going to know that by the label on your absentee ballot, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, and they could throw out your ballot if the mail carrier was of the opposite party. You don't register with a party in the state of Michigan. So there's nothing on the label that tells whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. As a city clerk, I can't look at my voter list and tell who's a Republican and who's a Democrat because you don't register with a party. What the label prints out on there is it's going to print your name and address that we're mailing it to. It's going to print a barcode. And that barcode, again, is what we're scanning in. It is your voter identification number. It's also going to typically have a number that is your precinct number as well as your ballot number. Okay, but there is nothing in the ballot number that is going to draw back to whether you are a Republican or a Democrat.
Okay. I'm gonna ask this to Ms. Sheridan. How many challengers per precinct is each party allowed or each individual group?
Okay, so we're talking about an absentee ballot count board, and my main interest, obviously is Detroit. So every absentee ballot count board, and in August, there was 137. So you're allowed one challenger per count board. So as we know right now, unless that number changes, there'll be 137 poll challengers allowed in Cobo Hall as a Republicans. Now, the
Well, we're not,
integrity-
and we're our own individual group.
Right.
So our group, I don't know about the Republicans, but we'll try to have 137.
Exactly.
And the Democrat Party would be allowed to have 137.
Yes.
And the Republican Party would be allowed 137.
Yes.
Okay.
What about other parties?
Well, I think there's 2 registered with the state, and that's by
Yes.
statute. But other
The other groups can be in there, like the ACLU, they can register to be in there. So it's not just the 2 political parties. Other groups can register to be in there. So.
Yes.
Okay, what is the difference of an absentee ballot and a mail-in ballot?
I'm smiling because, again, sometimes it comes down to interpretation and semantics on some things here. So what a lot of people are arguing about across the country, again, is absentee voting. They're saying is like in our state, in the state of Michigan, it's where we require that you actually submit an application and apply for an absentee ballot. So that's absentee voting. A lot of people will say that vote by mail states are states that you don't have to actually apply for a ballot, but you're automatically sent one if you're a registered voter. So it's argued about across the country about whether they're different or not, or whether they're the same. I hear it from both sides, and also from advocacy groups that they'll argue it's the same thing, or no, it's not the same thing. But absentee voting in Michigan, we require that you have an application before you have to submit it to us before we're going to automatically just give you a ballot, right? We're not just going to automatically send you one. You have to apply for it. There are states that if you are a registered voter, you are automatically sent an absentee ballot because you're a registered voter. We don't do that in Michigan. So that's the difference in the way that the different states would handle that.
All right, I got like 20 cards here, so I'm going to do a lightning round. We're going to do
Okay.
quick answers. Ms. Sheridan, how do we find out if a party is represented at the AV precinct? And what do you do if you don't know, if your party's not registered? That's the question. And I think by statute, the statute says that a party automatically, if it's one of the recognized parties, which Democrat and Republican, they are automatically already recognized. They'll just have to send out those letters, is my understanding, to the counties prior to the election in order to credential people.
Yeah, so like the Republican Party automatically is allowed to credential people
Right.
for every count board. But as you know, with the integrity fund,
Yes.
you have to like submit or apply for that status.
Right. Okay. Now, we talked about these long days we were telling people. So somebody reasonably asks, why don't we just work people in shifts?
So in an absentee counting boardroom, again, you don't want to do that, right? Because you don't want somebody coming in at 7 a.m. and having them leave at 2 p.m. because they're tired, And again, they've already been exposed to a lot of ballots. They've seen a lot of votes. You are protecting the integrity of the entire election. You don't want to give one candidate an edge over another candidate because somebody got tired and wanted to go home. And they're like, by the way, on the way home, they're calling somebody, this candidate was absolutely creaming the other candidate in the absentee county boardroom. You should call their campaign team, and they better start knocking doors or calling people and getting voters out. That's why you can't leave until technically the polls close at 8 p.m. So it's important to know that's why you can't do shifts until the polls are closing, is because you don't want people leaving your absentee county boardroom sharing that information.
So this is legal.
So there is a law out there that Senator Johnson, that is part of the Senate Bill 757 that I mentioned, that will allow election inspectors in absentee county boardrooms to start working shifts. However, they can't start the new shift until after 8 p.m. when the polls close. Okay, because at that point they can't, again, they're not running out and telling people to get a bunch of votes because the polls are closed, right? So nobody could go to the precinct and vote at that point, and nobody could turn another ballot in after that point. So that's why that deadline at 8 p.m. Is put on there, because no more votes could be cast after that time period.
What happens if it's extended like for a week?
Yeah. So what we're looking at again is that in-person voting stops at 8 p.m. on Tuesday, right? What we're looking at right now is that, the Secretary of State was sued by a group that said we should be counting absentee ballots 14 days after the election for anything that was postmarked the day before the election or prior. So anything that was postmarked on that Monday or prior, we have to start right now, unless it's appealed and something changes. But we have to count for 14 days after the election. Any ballots we receive through the mail that are absentee ballots that were postmarked November 2nd or prior. So it will go on for 14 days where we will be counting absentee ballots as long as they were postmarked Monday's date or prior.
Now there was another question, and we're going to keep these short answers so we can get through these. I know we're ending at 2:30, and I know you have to go soon too. What is somebody asked about that ruling, and they wanted to know what is the next step.
With the ruling?
Yes. I think they're asking, can it be appealed? Is probably what they're
It
asking.
is being, it's being decided on Monday whether it can be appealed, from what I understand. So we're waiting for that ruling to come out on Monday, and we're hoping that they will say that we can appeal this ruling.
Right, and the reason why there's question about whether it can be appealed or not is because this was actually an outside group that sued the Secretary of State. So the Secretary of State is technically the defendant in this case. So the question is, can someone else appeal a ruling on something where she was a defendant, because the Secretary is not going to appeal that herself? So that's the question, is does an outside group have the ability to appeal the ruling when it was actually the Secretary that was sued?
Do all towns have the same process? There are some ballots that are ending in the trash. I think we've talked a little bit about that. The different jurisdictions have different rules, right?
We have different rules, but no ballot should not be ending up in the trash. So let me tell you, we do have retention rules on ballots. So once ballots are voted, so even after that, there are some ballots that we're keeping like 6 years in bags. So it's not just after an election we take those ballots and they all go into a shredder. We have retention schedules by law that we have to hold on to those ballots depending on what type of an election it is, whether it's a city or local election or whether it's a federal election. Depends on how long we have to keep the applications and how long we have to keep the ballots.
All right. Now, this is good because we talked about prior to election day, we're going to be, the clerk's office is going to be comparing signatures. And this person wants to know, can poll challengers actually watch the clerks in their office prior to election day do the signature comparisons?
Now, election law does not allow you to come in and sit down behind my staff and watch them do that.
Okay.
I can tell you that we do it enough, though, that people are challenged on their signature, that we have had huge FOIAs from the ACLU as well as Perkins Coie, which is a law firm out of Chicago, that has submitted extremely large FOIAs to clerks in the state of Michigan, wanting to know how many people we are not processing due to signature challenges. because they were concerned that clerks in the state of Michigan were doing it too frequently, and so they FOIA'd all of us to see how many ballots were being rejected due to signatures. So I can tell you that we're doing our jobs, because people are wanting to know why signatures are being rejected, and they're only being rejected if they don't match and those individuals don't come cure the situation by 8 p.m. on election day.
All right, we've got a.
So would it be a good idea to FOIA the Detroit clerk, for example, and see on the reverse, how many applications are they rejecting because of the signatures don't match?
You could do that after the election is over. You're probably going to pay a lot of money for it, for that, and they're also going to have to go through and redact some information off there possibly. So you would need to be prepared to. It's a time, and FOIA says that we have the ability to charge you for the lowest paid employee capable of performing the task of their wages as well as their benefits. So you're going to pay an hourly wage for someone to do that.
There's a number of questions in here about what are the most common types of fraud that we can expect to see as challengers on election day.
Well, what Bob Cushman and Cliff and I, when we were down in August at Coble Hall, what we saw was about 20% of the county boards were not using poll books at that time. So that's a very big concern, obviously. And we saw problems with the electronic duplication that we talked about with where they would run the ballot that needed to be duplicated through a scanner, and it would show up on a screen. And one of our poll challengers actually saw people at that election. You had to vote, for one party or the other. But there were spoiled ballots because they voted, let's say, for it was John James, and they would check his name even though they were voting straight ticket or on the Democrat side. And then one of the poll challengers stood there, and you're standing at quite a distance, actually, and this is a problem. You're probably from here to here to see the scanner to where Tina is. But finally they figured out that the two workers there were actually deleting the vote for John James and then still counting the ballot. What did they do? They called the chair of the party, of the county board, and it took a while for that chair to come down and finally overview what was happening. And he said yes, that he reprimanded them and told them not to do that, but how many ballots were counted that way before that was discovered? So it's something. So it's something that it's good to know ahead of time, and we did not know that going in, that this could happen. So that was one of the things. Bob's going to talk a little bit about what. I
got about 6 minutes left this is lightning round. This is 10-second answers. Will masks and social distancing be required in the room?
Yes. Yes, if you're a precinct worker, we do require it. Voters are not required, but if you are a precinct inspector, yes, we do require it. We have face masks or face shields. We provide those. If you don't want to wear them, the face masks, you can wear the face shields. We do have those, but you do have to wear one in order to be an election inspector.
All right. Somebody asked if there's pen marks or coffee stains on the ballot. Well, what's the move for the challenger?
Again, that's where the ballot gets duplicated, because we don't want to put a ballot through the tabulator that has coffee on it or any substance, or even if another problem that we get is people like to use whiteout on their ballot, and the machines have problems with that, and we also don't want the whiteout, if it's still fresh, getting on our scanners. So that's another type of situation where we would have to duplicate the ballot.
Now, somebody said, there's a discrepancy because we said to make sure to bring your phone. You said you're not allowed to bring the phone in there. So I think that's something we're going to work out. You will see us again before Election Day if you're volunteering, because we have to hand you physically your credentials. We're going to give you instructions. So you'll see us again to pick up your packet before Election Day if you choose to volunteer. So at some point, we're going to come up with a way to keep everyone's phones, because I don't think it's the right thing to do to send people to Detroit and say, leave your phone an hour away from you. Yes, sir.
Let me ask you, is it true, they might, on TV, it says, vote online, on people that not just going online, is that true or false?
Well, that's we can talk about that afterwards, because that's not for the 80 county boards. Let's talk about that individually, okay? Thank you. what's the thing that this person wanted to say when you look at a ballot, when you first see it, what's something that can jump out at you immediately that something's wrong with it?
Well, like I say, it's difficult right now because you have to stand so far away, so you're just really watching the process of who's taking out the ballot, who's then checking to see and carrying on with the strip and passing that. So it's pretty hard right now, but obviously we could see at Cobo Hall that they were not using their poll books and they weren't checking names off or looking to see that ballot was in the book. So I mean, some of it was pretty obvious. Bob's story is going to be pretty obvious. When we finally figured out what was going on the computer screen, that was pretty obvious.
All right, so we're going to do about 3 or 4 more minutes of questions and then the 10-minute presentation from Bob, and we're going to be out of here by 2:30. Michigan is sending out unsolicited absentee ballots. I think they're sending out the applications. They send it out to all. Does anyone want to comment on that in 10 seconds or less?
So actually sending out applications is supposed to be the local clerk's job. The Secretary of State did do that for anybody who was not on the permanent absentee list. The court upheld that she had the right to do that as the chief election official in the state. So it was challenged and they did rule on behalf of the Secretary of State that she had the right to do that. So applications were sent out to anybody who basically was on the voter registration system in the state of Michigan who was not on the permanent absentee list.
All right, who controls the drop boxes? Somebody wants to know.
So in my city, we control the drop box. And so the drop box is in City Hall in the parking lot. We have a camera specifically pointed directly at the drop box. We also have a light over above that. It's locked. Only immediate staff members and our facilities team that we deputize can go out, get that, bring those ballots back into us. We check ours every single hour. We also have one in our lobby too. We might possibly put a second one, but at this point, the state was supposed to send those to the clerks and it's in September and we don't have them. So I'm guessing that one that's out in our parking lot will be the only one. But I would not put a ballot box out unless it had a security camera directly pointed at it and was in a lit area and it was bolted to the ground. If it doesn't have all those 3 things, I don't think a ballot box should be there.
All right. Somebody wants to know if there's a family of 7 and they received 7 absentee ballot applications, but most of them don't live at the house anymore. So let's say 1 or 2 people only live in the house. And that person decides to commit fraud and submit all 7 of those requests. Is there any way for the challenger to know that that's happened on election day?
Not for the challenger to know, but that's because in my absentee county boardroom, it's never going to get that far. Okay? So one thing to recognize the fact is that at this time of year, especially in presidential election cycles, you have various advocacy groups, even political parties, that send out absentee applications trying to get people to apply for absentee ballots. A lot of groups do it. There is one group in particular that has decided, and they're doing this across the country because I've had other clerks from other states tell me this. They are basically sending these applications to anybody who is related to you. So for instance, I have an individual who contacted me and said, my son is deceased. He's never lived with me at this address, but they sent an application to that. So for instance, if you ever go out and look at the white pages on the internet, it's going to show, like if you just put my name out there, it's not only going to show my name, but it's going to show everybody who is probably immediately related to me underneath that. What I think this group did was use that database to send these out to people, because let me assure you of this as a clerk. If an individual, for some reason, if we have received credible information that they no longer live there, or their mail has been returned to us, or if somebody says, I think that person died, anything like that, we can go through and we can actually mark someone's record as challenged or verified. If we receive credible evidence that that person is no longer there or that person is deceased. And what that means is even if you did get an application, because there were people who got those applications when that big bulk was sent out by the secretary. So even if they did get those and they returned it to me to get a ballot, they are not going to get a ballot from us until they meet the requirements of the challenged or verified status under election law. And what that means is you have to provide me proof of residency. You have to bring something to me, a utility bill, a bank statement, something that says, yes, I actually do live at that residence before we're going to issue you an absentee ballot. That code is also on the electronic poll book, so if somebody goes to the precinct, they try to vote and they have a challenge or verify status by their name, those election inspectors will see that code, and we train them to look for those codes, and they have to cure those codes before they can process that voter.
All right. One person wants to know, how are they going to be able to vote in person on election day and also be in the counting room at the same time? What's your recommendation there?
They're not.
Okay, so they need to vote
They're not.
early?
If you're working in an absentee counting boardroom, you need to vote absentee.
Okay. If somebody has concerns about the contractors doing things properly, I think that probably goes to the Hart Intercivic or the Dominion systems, the people that actually supply the tabulators that we use. Can you, in 15 seconds, explain what that accountability process is?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's really important is it's kind of a blessing and a curse sometimes for Michigan, but we're very decentralized, right? So we have a state level where the qualified voter file exists. It's a statewide database. We also have the county level where the county clerk's office is actually the office that programs the election. And then we have the local clerks who actually, as I mentioned to you earlier, we have to perform a logic and accuracy test. The logic and accuracy tests are done by the local clerks. So we're the checks and balances to the programming that the county did to make sure that everything is being done correctly. It's important to know too that we are testing that equipment, okay? So the vendor is not out there, and the vendor is not the one doing all of that for us. The vendor's not doing the programming of the machine. And so the vendor's not checking their own work, if you will, okay? So the programming is done by the county, the local clerks are checking it, and the vendors aren't the ones involved in the programming process.
All right, now, somebody wanted to know, on the machines, on the tabulator, is it one Republican and one Democrat that are counting those votes at the end?
Yes, so for us, on the high speeds, we're gonna have a Republican and a Democrat have to sit there together and feed all the ballots through. And that's again because we're adjudicating on the screen at that time. It's an adjudication process that takes place as each batch is being fed through.
Now, I know we said one precinct challenger per group. They want to know, is that just one Republican, one Democrat, one person for each group, or is that just one total, is what somebody wanted to know?
No, one from each group can be there.
Okay. Yes, if you want to be a poll challenger and you couldn't come today, we're going to do more of these trainings, and we will get you set up. This is just the first of many, so thank you for being here today. If a husband and wife, they live in the same household, they both vote, and they both put their ballots in one envelope and send that in, what happens?
So if they both send them in, so we're going to look for the ballot stub that actually matches the label on the envelope of the one that it goes to. The other one doesn't have an envelope that matches. We can't confirm, and we don't have a signature for that ballot.
If let's say one precinct sends out 25,000 ballots, but only gets 15,000 back, what happens to the other 10 ballots? What accountability is there on those 10,000 ballots?
Yeah.
That gets them in?
So actually we saw that a lot in August. We had a lot of people that requested absentee ballots that actually ended up going to the precincts to vote. And probably maybe even some of you in this room, because I had people contact me and they were afraid that the governor was going to close down in-person voting. And so we had a lot of people call in and they said, I'm going to apply for an absentee ballot, but I want to vote at the precinct, and because I'm afraid they're going to close the precincts and I want to make sure that I have a ballot to vote. So let me tell you what happens in the system. If I issue you an absentee ballot, you're put right into the qualified voter file. Those electronic poll books download the database from the qualified voter file. So on there, it's going to show that I issued you, say, ballot number 1000 as an absentee ballot. It's also going to show if I issued it to you, but I haven't received it yet, and then it'll show us if I issued it to you and you have returned it to me. So on the electronic poll book, if that voter tries to go to the precinct after they've already been issued an absentee ballot, and they swipe their license, it's going to pull up on their voter record that they were issued an absentee ballot. It will notify the precinct worker if we have already received it or if they have not returned it yet. So they're going to say to the voter, it shows here that you've already been issued an absentee ballot, but you have not returned it to the clerk yet. Do you have it to surrender to us? So at that time, they can surrender the absentee ballot to them. Our precinct workers are not allowed to take any steps in processing that voter until they call my office, and we go into the system and we spoil out that absentee ballot number. That way they can't take an absentee ballot and turn it in and vote it after they've already been to the precinct. So if they cannot surrender the ballot, they have to fill out an affidavit of absent voters, what it's called. And on that form, would they come up and they say, you know what, I never got the ballot, which we heard that a lot this time. I never got it. And we can say, well, we mailed it to you a week ago. Well, I never received it. On that affidavit of absent voter, it says on there particularly that I requested an absentee ballot or I never received it, and I never received it, or I requested it and it's either lost or destroyed. Okay, they have to fill out a sworn statement saying that they don't know where their ballot is or they never received it before we're allowed to process them. But again, they're going to call our office, tell us that voter is there. We're going to spoil out that absentee number just in case they're lying to you. We're going to spoil out that absentee number so that you can issue them a ballot in the precinct. But they're not allowed to issue a ballot in the precinct until we spoil the absentee number in our office so that that person cannot cast an absentee ballot. Okay?
Thank you. All right, so I want to thank you for being here today. Thank you, Ms. Barton. Thank you for being here. We appreciate what you've given us today. I'm actually going to go back and rewatch this video and rework the PowerPoint slides and send it to everybody that we have their email address. What I want to do is we're going to switch over and we're going to hear just a 10-minute presentation from Bob before we go. We're going to have you out of here by 2:30. Can you give you were talking about poll workers.
I've been recruiting poll challengers for probably the last year and a half. And once COVID came in, and I realized how heavily we were going to go to absentee ballots, and with the experience that we had in August, because actually they're just so short on workers at Global Hall. 75 people did show up to work that day.
Can you guys lower the volume for us because we're recording still, and we'll be out of here in about 10 minutes. So just stick with me for a minute.
So I kind of changed my focus for the time being to poll workers. Poll workers. I was on a national call with some pretty big names, and when I posed a question to them, and one of these people was Ginny Thomas, Clarence Thomas's wife, and when I posed the question on this national call about poll worker versus poll challenger, they said they're both very, very critical, but they said, but let's get poll workers right now. So I'm full-blown trying to recruit poll workers so that we have enough people sitting at the tables so that our election isn't chaos in the city of Detroit, and we can get through what I think will be probably close to 300,000 ballots to be counted. And then once we get that filled in, we have lots of people. I think that 800 people are going to get hired at Cobo Hall to be poll workers. They have 2,000 applicants already. Now, I don't know if those applicants are Republican or Democrat, but I'm hoping that they'll go 400 for Democrats, and then the more they see, because we've got Republicans applying every day, they'll kind of hold off and continue to fill those other 400 with Republicans.
So if you want to be, so we're doing challenger training, but if it appeals to you to be a worker more, talk to Ms. Sheridan before you leave. We're good? Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for adding. Say what? That's okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad to see you. I really appreciate you showing up. We're going to go through a 15-minute presentation in 4 minutes.
Well,
or
10 minutes.
like 10 minutes? Okay.
Yep.
So we'll make this quick. I just want to preface this by saying that my wife and I have been thinking about the subject of election integrity for quite some time. We finally decided to do something about it. We signed up to be challengers, and we won't get into the debate between challengers and workers because they're both very important. So we signed up, and we got trained actually the Saturday before the primary. We arrived at TCF Center a few minutes before 7 a.m. and were checked in and sworn in as challengers. The paperwork and our training indicated we weren't allowed to have phones. That's already been covered. I guess it's worth re-emphasizing that there really is a legal requirement. You sign, you swear that you're going to be there till 8 o'clock. And turned out I was there a lot longer than that. But anyhow, we knew it was strictly prohibited to share any information at all. That's been said several times. And we spent the first part of the day asking questions of the supervisory personnel on the ballot boards as to what they were doing so that we could figure out what it was we were looking to check for. And your training you're getting now is a lot better than the ones we had, so I'm glad to see that. I'm not going to go through the stations because it looks like it's becoming irrelevant. Tina Barton talked about the legislation that's going through the Senate, the House, and they expect it to be signed into law. So a lot of this minutia, it doesn't sound like you're going to have to, well, actually I should take that back because the ballots that come in on election day, because they changed the law to allow that, the absentee ballots, you're still going to be looking for this kind of checking. Although if they do it, this is the thing that's confusing to me. Do you think they'll be doing it outside the counting board, or will they still process these checks in the counting board with ballots that arrive on the day of election? To me, that's a question. I don't know.
Yeah, I think they still have to take place in front of the counting boards.
Okay. Well, I think that processing for the ballots that arrive before is going to get done beforehand if the legislation passes.
And that's why we're going to have
Yeah.
an update as we get closer to the election,
Right.
because everything could change still, but we'll have that reflected prior to the election.
Tina's already mentioned the fact that Election Law 168-767 indicates that a ballot is to be rejected if the signature did not match or the elector was dead as of election day. So we'll scoot on through that one. Based on my observations in Detroit in August and my many conversations regarding election law in Michigan, I can state with 100% accuracy that the single best thing that we ordinary citizens can do is either serve as a poll challenger or poll worker, one or the other. We proved to ourselves many times that it is possible to keep the fairness of the election in place because of the interaction we had the day of the primary. And the best example would probably be when we found tables that were processing ballots with no poll books, which is extremely verboten. We were able to bring that to their attention, and it was stopped immediately, at least until 2 a.m. And that's another story we'll get into. We're going to want to have, in my opinion, at least 100 challengers, maybe more, in Detroit, and probably the other locations and the other locations.
And I know we're cutting you short. Can you tell us what happened in Michigan when you were in Detroit, when you were there on the August 4th primary? And I'm going to pull up the tweet that I sent to you from the president too.
Well, let's go to this one. Yeah. Apparently by 5:30 p.m. or so, there were some very tired and discouraged workers that had simply left because of being tremendously overloaded. And keep in mind, there were 75 workers or more short that day. The verbalization of the offer of the bonus caused quite a cheer from the workers, and that probably occurred somewhere around 7:30. And that was fine, and the pace picked up until about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And then we saw the pace was slowing down, and people were starting to dribble out, walk out, which they're not supposed to do, especially the workers. And then about 12:30 midnight, the supervision came on, and they were very stern, very antagonistic toward the workers that were leaving. And I think they were getting very fearful that they just wouldn't be able to get the job done. And then perhaps the single most dramatic, most egregious event occurred at 2 a.m. By then, I was the only challenger there. For accuracy, I'm going to quote from my signed, notarized legal affidavit. At approximately 2 a.m. on August 5th, a soft male voice from the PA system instructed everyone to stop what they were doing, open every envelope, separate the ballots, and put them in the trays to go to the tabulators. That meant all the checks were going away. Immediately thereafter, a second, firmer, louder, different male voice came over the PA system and repeated those instructions. To say that I was shocked would be a vast understatement, because I knew that was extremely wrong. I made my rounds observing the workers after that every 20, 30 minutes, and the pace of the operation did pick up substantially, as the only operations being performed were the opening of the ballots, separating the tabs, sending it to the tabulators. No checking was performed after 2 a.m. it still required 3 more hours without checking to process all of the ballots that were left. I estimate that there were 10 to 20,000 ballots that were processed after 2 a.m., and I don't think any of those ballots should have counted.
And I think that's what Donald J. Trump, he retweeted, exclusive. Eyewitness says as many as 20,000 unverified absentee ballots counted in Detroit primary, which you were the eyewitness, the president retweeted.
So how can we get them full? How can we get those stopped being counted?
Well, in retrospect, and because the general is going to be so much more important, what I could have done was gone up to the people running the whole show and said, hey, you can't do that. But by then, I knew his rationale for doing that. And it wasn't just the one guy, it was the 2 top people that ordered 600 workers, very loudly, very sternly, to basically stop all the checks. So I knew I really wasn't going to stand a chance of getting it stopped then, and quite frankly, I didn't care too much about the results of the primary in Detroit anyways. But obviously, what's going to happen on the 3rd is going to be extremely important. That won't happen. Plus the fact we're going to have attorneys.
And we're going to mark, we're going to mark on our sheets, what's the precinct this is happening on, what ballot did it start on, what ballot did it end on, so we're going to have a greater idea of what happens. And then that's when the team of attorneys comes in and takes what you've done, and you may be a witness in a court case, because the nation's going to be watching as the president's team, as different groups like our group are going to file suit to make sure that they follow the law and they go back and do a recount.
To that point, we will have attorneys present, so we will probably bring the information to the attorneys, and they'll probably do everything that's necessary from a legal standpoint to stop that.
But we have to have good notes from good challengers that are going to make good witnesses. So that's where you're key in this.
So I'm not going to bore you with the notification process that I went through. I will just stop and mention that I did find out that it's important, if you see something substantial that doesn't get fixed right away, to come up with a legal affidavit that's signed, notarized, so that it can be used in a court of law later. And I'm kind of surprised that I haven't been in a court of law yet with this.
Well, I think there's nobody that really cares about what happened at the primary, right? It's hard to figure out. We care about it from an integrity standpoint, but you'd have to have a side that cares.
I drove home on the 5th, very tired, thinking I was going to wind up in a court of law. Happily, that hasn't happened yet. So, as you know, the canvass results, Detroit News reported that 72% of all the absent voter precincts did not balance, which means if there is a recount requested, that 72% of all the precincts cannot be recounted, which is a totally crazy election law that we really need to get straight.
What happens to those voters?
I'm sorry?
What happens to those votes? Do they get thrown out?
No. They were all counted. That's why it's so extremely important to be a worker or a challenger, to stop it in real time. I think, based on what I've seen and heard, your best chances of having an election that's anywhere near accurate is going to be if we have an army of workers and challengers, and that's what we're doing here today. And then there's some of the news reports that came by. But it was I'll just make a quick note that my interview with Breitbart was like a 12-minute verbal that was surrounded with a story, went out the day of, and that was probably 2 weeks after the election, went viral that day, and that's the day that Trump retweeted it. Now here's a point I can't overemphasize enough. I was called for an interview on the phone by Craig Mauger of the Detroit News. And he asked me, well, why did you volunteer to be a challenger? And my answer was love. I love my children. I love my grandchildren. I love my friends. And I love my country. And I can't think of a better way to help ensure it and help keep it than to guard our elections. That's right. And since we're in a hurry, I'll just skip right to this. No, actually the next one. I want you to remember that in 1863, that Abraham Lincoln did something that I personally think is remarkable. He was able to summarize the 6,000 words of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution into 10 simple, precise words. He said in his famous Gettysburg Address, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people." And I'm here to look you in the eye based on what I've seen, what I've heard since then, is that if and when we get to the point where we can no longer have fair elections with integrity, we will no longer be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. So thank you very much. I hope you all decide to press forward, become challengers and/or workers,
Here's the sign up for poll challenge.
Please sign up.
Here on the outside gate.
and God bless you all.
Okay, so thank you, Bob. Thank you for being here. So please leave us with your email address so that I can get a hold of you. I'll email you from my actual email address, and you can ask me any questions that you need to ask. Just because you sign up today doesn't mean that you have to be a challenger, but it leaves that option open. We're continuing to build our team. We've got over 100 people so far. I'd like to get to about 500 people. We're going to be doing more of these trainings, and we're going to get better at these trainings. So thank you for being here. Feel free to donate because we're going to use that to do more trainings. And it's nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
Freedom is